No, not yet. Hello, everybody. This is Dee with Unplug Grief Ministries podcast, and we are here today with Linde um, Carter. I almost forgot your last name. and she's from South Carolina, North Carolina, and
North Carolina. I'm from New Jersey, but I live in North Carolina.
oh, you're from Jersey. Well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I'm from the concrete jungle of New York. So
Okay.
you must be from the concrete jungle of New Jersey.
Yes, I am.
And I want to give you that next 15 to 20 minutes. Tell us about you. Tell us your story, what got you involved in doing what you do now, and how you are helping people through your ministry that you're doing. So I'm going to give you
Okay.
the floor again for the next 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll try to go into discussion if I don't really interrupt you between now and then. But go ahead, you're on board until I get that clock from them. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself because I'm sure people hate it when I interrupt.
Well, I'm Lindy Carter, as Dee said, and I am actually a registered nurse, hospice and palliative care for many years. I've been a nurse for over 20, oh gosh, almost 25 years, and I've done hospice and palliative care for about 12 years. But I'm also a nurse coach. And with that, when people first hear that, they think that that means that I coach only nurses, but that's not the case. What a nurse coach is a registered nurse who is also trained as a coach. So I went through a pretty intensive training, and I took an exam. So I'm actually a board certified nurse coach. And in my area, specialty is grief and loss, transition, and end of life coaching. So it kind of that all those things fall under there because I am also a certified end of life doula. So I do that work as well.
Do
Um,
you also do funeral homes?
I'm not a funeral director, no.
No, no, no. But I'm saying, do you also help people after the death, the family and all?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and I concentrate. I mean, I do work with the person at the end of life, like with the person who's dying, but my support is even more so for the family. Because
Okay.
actually offer support on the back end, like after they lose their loved one, I offer that support on the back end on how to navigate through that stuff and grief issues and things like that.
So you
So
help mostly like with the anticipatory grief for the
yes,
family.
and I
So
do practical things too. Like I help them, try to find if they need to hire like additional caregivers in the home. If they don't have any of that paperwork done, like healthcare power of attorney and advanced care planning, like living will, things like that. I can help with all that stuff. And then
that is
also, if they
awesome.
want to do a legacy project, I that's not my area of specialty, but I know several other doulas who specialize in doing legacy work, and so I can also help them with things like that,
That is
and just be a
awesome.
companion doula. Like if they need somebody to come and sit with their loved one, to give the family and the caregivers some respite, some break, then I do that as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And so I still work as a registered nurse at the bedside in hospice and palliative care. I was in our inpatient unit for about 6 years. I had been out in the field doing home care and so forth, and I went back about 6 years ago to the inpatient, and now I'm back in the field again. I basically go out. I work weekends. I go out on the weekends and do admissions, meaning I bring on the first person that they see from hospice, and I bring them under care. And that's in people's homes, in long-term care facilities, and assisted living, wherever the patient is residing. And so I do that for 12-hour shifts on Saturday and Sunday. And then during the week, I have my coaching and doula practice. And I also work a lot with the International Doula Life Movement, which is the organization where I got my doula training. And it's a growing, very quickly growing organization. And we offer pretty intensive training for end of life doulas, but we also have a lot of other courses as well, of which I teach one of the grief courses. I teach the grief course which I developed mainly for the doulas in order to manage their own grief as well as support clients and families with their grief, with anticipatory grief, and then after the fact if that's something that they want to do.
Thank you.
And so I also do
Thank
a
you
couple of
because
groups.
Linda, I tell you, I keep reminding people we have a loved one who's dying, and we know they're dying or they're at the end of their life. But so many times when we deal with anticipatory grief, that the family doesn't realize this is just not about them. But anticipatory grief is also about the person who's ill and who's dying. And a lot of times they are the ones who are forgotten because everybody's so focused more on the family and what they're dealing
Hmm.
with and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I
And
remember
the
when I
person who's ill, depending on how long they've been ill and what's been going on with them, they've already they're already experiencing grief because they've already had losses. They've lost their health, they've lost their independence, maybe they've had to stop working if they're still young enough, if they were working and so forth. So there's a lot, you're right, there's a lot going on for the person who's ill and who's dying. And we sometimes do forget. And that's I learned in hospice care, that whole holistic approach, that we are caring not just for the patient, but for the patient and their loved ones, their caregivers, their family. But that we have to be giving equal attention all the way around, because everybody's dealing with something different throughout that process when they're caring for somebody who's dying, and when you're the person who has the illness and you're declining, and you're facing your own mortality and your own death. There's a lot going on, a lot going on. So.
yeah, and I also remind them because I'm involved like mostly with the muscular dystrophy community because my son that's what my son died from. But and I always tell them because from my own personal experience as a caregiver who's not only dealing with anticipatory grief plus your loved one, my son, although we knew he was going to die from the disease, we just didn't know when. But I still made sure that he was taken care of.
Hmm.
And a lot of times I did take him to a grief therapist, not a grief therapist, a therapist that can help him deal with this. Because I can tell a lot of times he was with a lot of anger, but he was
Hmm.
very good in keeping that anger or whatever inside of himself. Hence why I thought that the grief therapist would be okay for him to go to. And I wanted to make sure that he was first. But I know that I'm guilty as a caregiver that I wish I could have done more.
Always, people always feel that way, no matter how it plays out, no matter how much care they give, no matter how much time they give. People always feel like, um, some people will say, I don't come away with regrets. Like, I know I did my best, but they'll still have that feeling like, yeah, but maybe I could have done this or I could have done that. It's a very prevalent thing that
Guilt.
caregivers, they feel that way. So
Yes. Guilt.
yeah. So yeah, so I also do some support groups. I have a pretty active and big Facebook group. It's called Growing Through Grief, and it's really for people who have experienced a loss at some point. And when I talk about loss too and grief, it's not only necessarily about a person who has died, a person or a pet. But also, transitions that people go through. Some people really struggle with, like, when their children get older and leave the home. If they have people who retire, that's a huge transition. Even if they're looking forward to the retirement, it's a huge transition. Women who going through menopause, that a lot of different changes and stuff. So there's a lot of big transitions we have in our life, and I feel like in our culture we don't make a lot of space for people. We just kind of figure they're just going to get through it. You know what I mean? Like, that's life. You're just going to get through it, and that's true. But at the same time, sometimes you feel different ways and have a reaction to these things that happen that you don't expect, and you don't know really what to do about it. So I try to offer that kind of support in my Facebook group, and people interact with each other and support each other, which is really great. And so I do some workshops in there. I'm actually going to be resuming my workshop series next month, where I do around grief and loss topics. And I also have a support group that I do once a month that is free to the group members. One month I do an evening session, and the next following month I do an afternoon session. And that's just basically like a virtual grief support group where people come. It's a safe space. I don't record it or anything, and just talk about what they're experiencing. I do that as well for the doulas through the International Doula Life Movement, which we call IDLM. I also run a monthly group for them. So doulas have a space to come and talk about what grief issues may have come up with clients that they've been dealing with, so they can get some help and support there, but also for their own grief issues. Because sometimes, a lot of people go into the end of life work and grief work because of their own losses, which is what my case is. I mean, I lost my dad when I was in college. I was 19 when I had my first really major loss in my life. And then, like grandparents and so forth, follow thereafter. And then I lost my mom in 2008, and then in 2019, my late husband died. And so, with just some of the different things that I've experienced myself, and having worked in hospice for so long, I just felt really drawn to doing this kind of work. So when I became a coach, I pretty much knew from the beginning this was what I wanted to do, because I really, really feel, like I said, like there's such a need for this in our society, and not everybody needs the same thing. And not every grief therapist or grief coach, can meet those needs. A lot of it depends on what, personal background. Like my late husband, for instance, unfortunately, took his own life. So when you have a suicide death, there's a lot different with that than with other kinds of deaths. Not that it's special or anything, it's just it's different. The people left behind, the loved ones, the things that they experience, again, some of the guilt and different things, and even how it's accepted in society. I discovered that you don't get a lot of support, and not because people don't care about you, but because um, there's so
Uncomfortable.
much stigma still attached to it, and they don't know what to say. And so,
Yes.
unfortunately, as with grief, I'm sure doing this work as well, people in any kind of situation when there's a loss, especially if it's a sudden loss or something traumatic like that, they don't know what to say to people, so they don't say anything at all. And when I teach my grief course, I always say that that is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, because
Even if you say to the person, "Listen, I don't know what to say.
yeah,
I'm here to listen. I'm here for you. I don't even know what to say to you, but I'm here." That is the
that's,
best thing you can do if
yeah,
you don't know what to
that's what
say.
I call be present. If you don't know
Yes.
what to say and what to do, just be
Just
present
be
because
present.
action speaks louder than words. I also
Hmm.
teach that class. I call it how to become an effective comforter, and I teach the what to say, what not to say, and why it's so important. But I also teach how I hate it when my brain goes like this. This is what happens when you get old. Um,
Yeah, I know.
how to
I know. I
yeah,
know.
how to effectively help the griever. And the number one thing is just be present.
Hmm. Yep.
Just sit
Hold
there
that
with
space for
them,
people.
hold their
Hmm.
hand, give them a hug. If you don't know what to say, it's better to be silent and just be present
Hmm.
than to say something that can be hurtful to the griever.
Yes.
And
Yes.
unfortunately, society doesn't teach us how to effectively comfort
No.
grievers.
No, I read something. I think it was in the book. I don't know if you're familiar with the book that Megan Devine wrote. It's called "It's Okay If You're Not Okay,"
Yes, I heard
and
it.
it's about when she was a therapist, I believe, and lost her partner very suddenly. 2009, I think it was, and thought as somebody who helps other people, she thought she knew something about grief, and she said it wasn't until I experienced it myself in a sudden tragic death like that I was like, I don't know anything about grief. And so she said, she was saying that like we in our lives we are taught, human beings in general, particularly in this country, in the United States, we're big achievers. We reach your goals, the work ethic, everything like that. So we're taught to gain. We're taught to achieve things. We're taught to
Yes,
gain things, but no one ever teaches you how to lose. We're very
exactly.
bad losers. And
Thank
when we
you.
lose when we
Yes,
lose a loved one, it's, you know what I mean? Like our culture, our society, we just don't know how to deal with it. It's not that people are mean. It's not that they don't care. We just don't know.
they
And
have
that's
good
part of my mission
intentions. Yes,
like you, my part of my
yes,
mission is to educate people and let them know that, everybody grieves differently. Every reaction is okay. There's no time frame. If it takes you 3 years, it takes you 10 years, it takes you a month, it doesn't matter. Every loss is different. Every
yes.
loss. I mean, I lost my dad, over 40 years ago. And then when my mother died, what was it? Almost 14 years ago now. It was a totally different experience because she had a longer term illness. It was later in life. It was just the circumstances were completely different. And so my grief was different. My grief process was different. And that's basically why I do, grief coaching and end of life coaching, because I want people to understand that however you react is okay. And it's only not okay if you feel like it's not okay for you and you need help and you need support moving through it, not moving on, but moving forward and figuring
Yes.
out like what your life is going to look like after this loss has happened, and what direction you want to go, and how to deal with all the changes. So
And one of the things that I also teach people, like you said, we all grieve differently. But one thing that I've learned as a parent who's lost a child, and that communicate with a lot of parents who've lost a child too, is one thing that you should not say is, I understand your pain.
right,
Because the
because
way
you don't.
I was educated and taught, My pain is not the same as your pain. And the reason why is my relationship with my son is
Hmm.
not the same relationship you had with him. So
Correct.
my you can't understand my pain because you don't understand what my relationship with him was. You might have had a relationship with him, but that is a total different pain because
Hmm.
your relationship with him is totally different than mine. So it doesn't mean my grief is greater. It's just that we deal with grief or our
Hmm.
pain in
Yes.
a different way. But
Yes.
the important thing is to be supportive, to be loving,
Yes.
to encourage, to comfort, you know.
Hmm.
So, yes, everything you said is like, boom, you just like nailing it.
Well, and it's so funny too because when other people come to me, like particularly other nurses, but there's over the past month since I've been doing this, my practices, I've been doing this for over a year now. I started my training in 2020, and then I finished in early 21 and started my practice. And so, so other nurse coaches who are going through the same program, who will reach out to me if they have an interest in the same area, like they want to do, they may be interested in being a doula, or they want to do grief coaching or whatever. And I've had friends of mine who, aren't in the business say, well, don't you worry about what the competition. I'm like, oh, competition, my goodness, we need more people doing this. That's the
Yes,
problem, is there's not enough resources for people.
yes.
There's not enough things out there. And people think, oh, well, so I just go to see a therapist. Well, not every therapist is trained in how to do grief. And
Thank
sometimes
you.
that's a struggle for them because they want to help the client who comes in, and they don't have a lot of specific training in grief. And then even people who are trained as grief therapists, that particular person might not be the right fit for you, and you have to find somebody else. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of people out there who do it. So I say, yeah, no, the more grief counselors, the more grief coaches, the more end of life coaches and doulas that we have, the better, because this is an area where we desperately need more people who are not afraid to talk about these things, who are not, I mean, I even told for the doulas, I do that once a month as well. I hold what we call a death talk. And so we
Yes.
have a talk where we can, an hour and a half, where we just talk very openly about everything death and dying, meaning that, whatever experiences you've had in your life, misconceptions, things you've learned, experiences in your doula practice, even how other people receive it. Like, how does your family react when you told them you want to do end of life care? End of life work, or because I've gotten that for years. Like, I don't know how you're a hospice nurse. Oh my gosh, how do you do that? I'm like, I love what I do. And then they look at you like you're crazy. Isn't it depressing? Don't you get depressed all the time because you're around people who are dying? I'm like, no, I don't get depressed because dying is a part of life. We're all dying, basically. And we're all going to actually die someday. But we're kind of like cars that depreciate. You know how they depreciate when as soon as you drive them off the lot. As soon as we're born, we start depreciating. We're on our way to dying, basically.
And
I mean, I
actually,
know some
life
people that sound so morbid and terrible, but it's the truth. It's how we're designed as human beings.
it's
And
so
so,
funny that
you
you would
know,
say that because life insurance, I don't know, I sell life insurance, but the funny thing, the younger you are, the more value of your life insurance. But the
uh-huh,
older you get, the value of your insurance goes down because
uh-huh.
of your age, because of your what's the another word? Your age.
Oh, any diseases you have or comorbidities or anything like that. Yeah, that all figures in. Yep.
It's weird that they would, but I just, to me, as a life insurance agent, I just think that sort of, what's the word? Insults the seniors.
Well, and one of my missions too, which is kind of on a back burner at the moment, but is to change the way the insurance industry looks at suicide. Like when
Yes.
my husband died, I had to borrow money from actually a good friend of mine who was a mentor of mine when I used to be a legal nurse consultant. She actually very kindly immediately started like raising money, like sort of like a little thing on Facebook, and raise some
Yeah.
money. And I wasn't going to have anything big. I was just having a cremation and so forth. But at that point, because of his health issues and stuff, financially, even though I was working full time and then some, I was working two jobs. At that point, he wasn't working. He was on disability. He wasn't getting a lot of money from disability because he had been self-employed. Just our whole financial picture was not great. And when he died suddenly like that, I didn't even have access to his life insurance. I mean, he had like $30,000 worth of life insurance. Didn't get paid a dime because he killed himself. And that's how life insurance companies look at it.
Well, then
You do
that
not.
life insurance, that usually with life insurance, you have the insurance has to be in effect for 2 years.
It
And
was.
and if you do suicide in those 2 years, then no, you don't get anything.
No, it was over 2 years.
It was over 2 years,
Hmm.
So did it say anything in the policy that
Yeah, they told me he wasn't per the policy. I was not eligible to receive any benefits.
I
So
would look into that? That doesn't sound right.
um, yeah, so I know it varies depending on the insurance companies and so forth, but that can be a huge surprise to people. Like when that happens to them, especially if the person's suicide is a surprise. So like if they didn't know, the person had those intentions or that they were feeling that way, they were depressed or whatever, and it comes as a big shocker. And then the family's like, oh my God, we're not gonna be getting any money to pay for like a funeral or a cremation or anything like that. And I'm sorry, but these days, not everybody has, $1,200 even for a cremation. Around here, it's between $900 and $1,200 just for a basic cremation, like with no ceremony or anything, no memorial service, nothing. A lot of people don't have that hanging out in their back pocket to just be able to say, here you go. So that's something that and I think even with the 2-year rule, I don't think that's necessarily appropriate because the families already, the survivors, already are going through a tremendous ordeal and a trauma. And like I said, all the stigmas that are attached to suicide and so forth. And then on top of it, they have that to deal with too. So that's just one of my asides. It's kind of like one of my little pet peeves that I learned, in my, just because of, again, my own experience. A lot of this work that I do is because of some of the experiences I've had in my life and how I felt like there just wasn't adequate care. There wasn't adequate resources. There wasn't enough awareness. Someone just mentioned recently, she was talking about caring for her parent. It's one of the grief groups that I belong to on Facebook that I had joined because with my schedule, I wasn't able to get to like a real, like get in person to attend like a virtual group or a group in person. And she was talking about how she was feeling preparing for the death of her parent, that she had been caring for him for all these months and so forth. And I mentioned that about anticipatory grief. And so many people in the group piped up and said, oh my gosh, people don't talk about that. When you have somebody who's ill, or even if they have a sudden illness and they're in the hospital, and all of a sudden you're grappling with the idea that, oh my gosh, this is serious and this person might die. And you're having all this anticipatory grief and you don't understand it. You don't know what's going on. And certainly nobody around you understands it. And the healthcare world, God bless us, I've been a nurse a long time, doctors, nurses and stuff who don't, deal with end of life care and so forth. They don't really know how to help you either. So
because
it's it's
they were never educated, and
correct. They
that's
were never
that's
trained.
one of my goals as in the seminars and workshops I'm doing. Not just pastors and teachers, but doctors and nurses.
Hmm.
And I noticed my son's father was like this too. It's like they're immune to the death, to someone dying,
Hmm.
and you don't know, are they so immune to it that they don't know how to comfort the family, they don't know how to grieve on their own, or do they wait to go home and then they let it out?
Well, generally, most doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals will generally grieve privately, over patients or a situation that they'll deal with a patient and family, because that's how we're taught. We're taught, you have to be the strong
Okay.
one, you have to be the professional, you don't cry, you don't, and I have discovered in my hospice work over the years that, families actually, if you show some emotion, like if a particular patient really touches me in some way because they remind me of somebody, or if I've been very, very involved in their care, whether it's been inpatient or at home or whatever, you get attached to people, and you care for them and their families, and you worry about them and so forth. And sometimes when somebody dies, you're not necessarily feeling the same grief their family's feeling, but at the same time, you're experiencing that sadness as well. And while you're not going to be, throwing yourself on the person, sobbing and carrying on, all that kind of stuff, because that would be inappropriate, showing a little bit of emotion and showing them that you care can be very comforting to people who've just lost someone, when they
Yeah,
know that the
I noticed.
caregivers like the bedside and stuff are not, so clinical that they don't care. And the other thing too is the way healthcare has gotten in recent years is that, we're so understaffed in all areas, in all ways, that there's always another person. There's always the pressure. You got to go see this person. You got to go take care of this patient family. You can't spend the time with these people because we have other people you have to take care of because we don't have enough staff.
Yeah,
So that's a whole nother challenge there as well. So
I,
yeah, the healthcare professionals over the last few years, especially with COVID and stuff, have had huge issues themselves with grief and need that support too.
I
So
remember when my son died, even the nursing agency who helped with the 24/7 care, it was like they were not allowed to come to his funeral. Not even the director
yeah.
of the agency would come. And to me, I mean, I thought we all had this bond, and then it was like there was actually no support for it.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
I thought that was
Well, and see, in hospice, we don't do it that way. Like in hospice, we do sometimes attend. I mean, I have over the years attended funerals of, a patient or family I've gotten particularly close to. Um, because you can do that professionally and appropriately, and like you said, that the family, they develop a relationship with you over time when they've been in your home and everything, taking care of your loved one, and it helps them to see that show, like you said, that show of support. Oh my gosh, she took a, or he took a time out of their busy day. I mean, sometimes I've gone to these things in my scrubs, you know what I mean, like still, you know um in my work attire, because it's part of my work day, but I've taken out an hour to go to the memorial service or the funeral service or whatever, and it's very important.
so. We have only 10 minutes left, unfortunately. And
Okay.
so tell us, do you have a website, a book, or anything?
Yes, I have the Going Through Grief group on Facebook. I have a website. I also, like I said, through the group, offer some both, paid and complimentary things. The workshops you have to pay a little fee for, but the support group is free. And then I also, and also with the doula work, if anyone wanted to take the course, the grief course that I teach, it's not necessarily just for doulas. So you can take that class as well if you're interested at all. When you get in touch with me, let me know, because I do gear it towards, like I said, for people to be able to deal with their own grief and understand the causes of grief, what they are, all different things like that, as well as, being able to support other people, whether you're doing it in a professional capacity or not,
So
even if
what
it's
is
just
your
to support you.
website? What is your website?
My website is, it's www.simplicitynursecoach.com.
Okay.
And it's currently under construction. It should be. I'm tweaking it a little bit because I actually changed the name of my business, so it's still up and running, but you'll see some changes there. So
So you're still rebuilding it. I remember when I had to
yeah,
rebuild my website too. Um, Remind me, did you not do a book as well?
no, no,
No.
I would love to. As a matter of fact, that's one of my to do list of projects that I would like to do, but I have not
Well,
done that yet.
actually,
No.
we have a grief coach in I think you're part of it, the Global Grief Network. And
Yes.
Allison, she's now doing a book challenge that I'm going to join because I've been procrastinating and writing my book, so I'm going to join.
Mhm.
So you may be interested in
Oh,
seeing.
I'll have to. Yeah, I am part of that group. I'll have to look into that because it's one of those things I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and especially since I started doing this work. Um, and I've just been trying to think about what I want to do, like what kind of a project, what I want it to look like, and what you know how, because I want to, obviously, just like all of us, want it to be something that's gonna serve people and help people. So,
Yeah, I think I would like to take your doula course.
oh, cool.
I think that would be something I could do because I remember when I was a volunteer at Haven Hospice, a lot of times that's what I did. I sat with patients, and sometimes even at the very last minute, um, and it just and like even when my son passed away, he passed away in my arms, and it's like I mean he was 25 years old, but he was my baby. He was my only
Hmm.
child, and
Yeah, yeah.
all I can do is encourage, listen to God's voice and go home with God. And I'll see you on Resurrection Day. And Timothy
Hmm.
and I have this joke. You can share it with anybody if you want, but the Bible talks about in Revelation that when Jesus comes, the dead's going to rise first. So,
Right.
and when they rise first, they're going to have a new body, new everything. So I told Timothy, that's why I keep your ashes with me at all times, because we never know when Jesus is going to come. And when he comes, you're going to be resurrected. And I want to go to heaven. So I'm going to hijack my way by grabbing your legs as you go up. And the other joke I had was that we had is I said, when you get to heaven, get a good chair and sit next to God because God's going to decide who stays and who goes. And have
Hmm.
like a little protest sign to keep your dad out. So,
That's funny.
and save a seat for me because I will protest with you as well.
That's funny.
So we only have 6 minutes left, and I just want to thank you so much for coming in because just listening to what you share, it brought back memories of when I was a volunteer at Haven, but it also brought back a lot of memories and desires because I've heard about, the end of life, and I'm thankful there's you that can help us understand or help me understand that the nurses and doctors when they leave is when they really actually grieve if they do,
Hmm.
and that they can't show their emotion. And I think I know they're saying not to stay professional, but at the same time, you're human.
Hmm.
We're all human, and God created our emotions for a reason, and we need to be
Hmm.
allowed to use it when needed.
And honestly, doctors have even more pressure that way. Like it's a little bit more accepted for nurses, but doctors, are expected to be stoic and professional and not show any emotion. And we're human. You know what I mean? They're human. I mean, it's not. It's going to happen, and it's not a bad thing. So.
Well, I still think they need to be educated about it. So
Oh, I do too. I agree. I definitely agree. And it's not something that, I mean, in nursing school, I don't, honestly, I don't even remember hearing about hospice and palliative care or having had any um, training. I mean, maybe it was just like one little chapter or something. I mean, about grief, and it was certainly not sufficient. And a lot of my nurse colleagues who don't work in end of life, but who want to, support their patients and stuff and be effective, they are desperate for that kind of knowledge and education and stuff because they want to be, better at managing their own grief as well as being able to support friends, family members, patients, families, all that kind of stuff. So
yes, and I think we as humans need to learn how to be a better comforter and a better
yeah.
support. And even if
Well,
you
and I
don't
think
know,
if we would talk about it more, like in some
yes,
cultures, some cultural things, people are afraid, like if I talk about that, it's going to happen, or if I reach out too much to somebody who's had a really tragic loss, oh my gosh, maybe that's going to happen to me. I mean, people just have a lot of
they
those
jinx
kinds of
themselves.
fears
Yeah,
and feelings about it. So we don't talk openly about death. We don't prepare for it. I mean, when you're going to have a baby, you do all kinds of preparation for the birth, but we don't, encourage people to prepare for their deaths. And so that's what doing doula work is about, is just trying to encourage people that you can plan on this stuff far ahead of time. You can change your plans. You don't have to wait until you're older and ill or even young and been diagnosed with something serious or whatever. You can do that anytime. I say, I don't care if you're 18 years old, or 20 years old or whatever. You should have a living will, and you should have those instructions as far as what, so your family knows what to do. If heaven forbid you're like in an accident or something and you can't speak for yourself, I don't care how young you are, it's never too early to do that.
yeah.
When
And we
once
have
you're
to
an adult,
remember,
it's never too early to do that.
and we have to remember something. Grief is not a dirty word.
Correct.
We live with
It's a
it
natural
on
process. We're supposed to go through it. I
yes.
mean, it's designed actually to protect us and help us. It's not a bad thing.
We live with it on a daily basis, and a lot of people don't realize that when they're going through a certain experience, losing
Hmm.
a job, losing your home, graduation, weddings, losing a pet, whatever, that is part of your grief.
Hmm.
It's an emotional loss,
Yes,
and don't be afraid of it. But also look at it this way: grief is also a teacher.
very much
It
so.
teaches us so much about our life as we go through it. And every time we had some kind of an emotional loss, that experience teaches us to somehow become a better person. It helps
And
us.
generally I have found the initial pain that you feel from a loss does get better with time if you allow the grief to come in. Is
Yes,
when I've done that in the past. Like if you push it away and try to act normal and be, "Oh, I've got this handled," or you don't deal with some of the things that come up for you, then as time goes by, sometimes it gets even worse. And people say, "Well, everybody told me it would get better with time, and instead it's gotten worse." I'm like, "Yeah, because you haven't dealt with your grief." And I know that
yes,
from a personal
yes,
standpoint because that's how I used to deal with things. I grew up in a family where, we're very open about talking about death and dying and so forth. But my mother was also the sort who was like, okay, soldier on. Once you have a loss, you just soldier on. And so I learned some valuable things in that lesson, but I also learned some bad habits that have cost me a lot. And
yes,
so you have to. One of my clients has said to me this to me. I remember it kind of really resonated where she said, as time went by and the pain just got a little bit less and I was able to kind of function, She said, I realized that if I let grief walk alongside me, if I befriended it, it's not my enemy, it's my friend. It's there to
Yes.
help me. It's not something I should dread. It's not something I should push away. It's there to help me heal. And if you look at it that way, I mean, she came to that on her own. I mean, I was working with her, we were coaching and so forth, and I just thought that was awesome. I was like, yeah, that's exactly the way. You don't move on because you don't want to forget that person. The person you are today is because that person or those people were in your life and part of your life, and you love them and they loved you and all that kind of stuff. And that goes for pets as well. But at the same time, you're still alive and you